Hey everybody, Volen here, in pursuit of art. I wanted to do a quick video for you guys this week. I always want to do a quick video, it never actually works out. But I wanted to get something to you guys because I didn't really get a chance to update the blog or get on Facebook at all last week. I was really busy at work, so I'm hoping to be able to spend just a few minutes with you guys this week and show you some things that, again, I think you wouldn't have seen before. So what I want to talk to you guys about this week is called functional fixedness, okay? And it sounds like a weird or fancy thing, or what. It doesn't sound like anything art related, but it is. Basically what it is people's tendency to always do something in the way that they think it should be done, okay? This is something, it's not just about art. I see this in life all the time, but I see it in art because art really requires you to solve problems all the time. So really anytime you're doing a picture, all the things that go into making an image are problem solving, from just very basic problems of, let's say, just positioning the figure, so just rotating the torso, what angle is the pelvis going to be in relation to it, bend of the leg, all that stuff, to what values am I going to use to convey the mood, what color am I going to use to support it. Like all of those things, even though they are art and are emotional communicators, they have a very logical basis, okay? So if you do understand how to do things logically, at a certain point, once you get good enough, you'll be able to automatically just get the right result. But the thing is that a lot of us get stuck in, especially when we're learning on our own, we get stuck in thinking of how things should be done. And again, I see this all the time. So this is inspired by some messages that I exchanged with someone on Facebook. I'm just quickly getting them up on my screen over here. So this is a couple weeks ago, and I'm doing this video, if the person's watching, not as a criticism, but this video is inspired by what I see, because this is something that I get stuck into all the time. So what we talked about with this person was perspective, and they had an idea of how they should practice, but their idea wasn't really allowing them to actually practice perspective. They were practicing the tools of perspective. Now, I'll show you what this functional fixedness thing is exactly. So there's this test by cognitive psychologists that the objective of it is that you need to take this candle. So the candle needs to go on the wall in a way that the candle doesn't drip wax onto the table, okay? So these are the objects that you have. You have a box full of thumbtacks, okay? So you have like sharp thumbtacks, you can stick stuff with them. You also have a box of matches, and you have the candle. So the candle's unlit. You need to have the lit candle be fixed onto the wall. Could be here, could be on the other side of the wall. So it needs to be stuck onto the wall, lit, and not drip wax onto the table, okay? And these are the items that you have. Now, I'm gonna put the solution in right after this. So if you do want to bash your brains against the monitor and figure this out for yourself, pause now and think about it, okay? I'm giving you the solution now, okay? I'm gonna repeat the problem one more time in case you didn't get it. The candle needs to be lit and fixed onto the wall, wherever on the wall, in a way that it doesn't drip wax onto the table, okay? And you have a sharp box of thumbtacks and some matches, right? There's nothing off screen that you can see. And the wall is made of, you know, that corkscrewy soft material that you can stick things onto, okay? That's it. Without me saying too much, that's what the problem is. Now the solution. Okay, so this is it. The solution is that you use the box that the thumbtacks are in, and then you stick the box with the thumbtacks onto the wall, and you put the candle in, okay? So what the problem diagnoses pretty much is that people would try and stick the candle directly onto the wall. So they would get the thumbtacks and they would try and drive them through the candle, through to the wall. They would melt the candle and they would melt the side of it and try to stick it onto. So they were basically trying to figure out ways to stick the candle onto the wall but that's not really solving the problem of how to make it not drip wax, right? So people basically would think of the box as a container for the thumbtacks, so they have one item and they think of this one item as serving one function. Okay, they I say they, but it's we are, as Brad Rigney says, we are rigid thinkers. He calls himself a rigid thinker, but we're all rigid thinkers. We tend to focus and fixate on this thing does this and that does that, and that helps simplify a very complex world, but at the same time it limits us severely in our options. So, solution again. So what this functional fixedness in art especially is that for beginners and people that are studying and learning how to do stuff, we don't really use our tools in a way that supports what we're actually doing. We oftentimes think of the tools almost as important as the final product. So what do I mean by that? So the conversation was about perspective. So I'm gonna tie these two sides of the screen together in just a second. So what we talked about was perspective, okay? And the problem that this person was having with perspective is that they said that the grid, when they made a grid, their grid wouldn't be well made, and then the form would distort. So just because the vanishing points when doing the grid freehand, because they weren't precise, that the form would skew. Because if your grid is incorrect and you're following the grid, you're ruining the form that you're doing over the top of it. But the question with this is, and the functional fixedness aspect of it is, what is the grid for? Okay, what is perspective for? So what I'm asking you guys to do this week is to think about, what are you actually learning? And the studies that you're doing, what are they teaching you? So let me ask you this. Is perspective about the grid? If no, then how should you approach doing the grid? Now, the person says that the problem is doing the grid freehand, right? So the functional fixedness right there is, I need to be doing things freehand, okay? As artists, as we try and get better, we always try to do everything with the minimum amount of tools, right? We have the traditional image of the artist, measuring things and doing it absolutely correctly in the perfect place. Awesome. Okay, that's a possibility. That's a possibility if you spend the next 50 years doing just this. Okay, that's the master image. So the master can do this. If you've read like Zen stories, there's always like the master, the person that has focused and concentrated on a task for so long that as they do a simple daily task, they're literally slicing through the mysteries of the universe, right? The butcher that has a knife, that as they slice through the meat, the knife gets sharper, okay? It doesn't get dulled. So the novice slices through the meat and their knife gets stuck. There's tendons and bones and all kinds of stuff. They can't, like, they're just hacking away at this thing. It's not working. And the master, he takes his knife and effortlessly he does something and it's correct, okay? That's the image that we have. But that is not how it works. And the functional fixedness aspect of the whole thing makes you get stuck in actually working on the tools instead of working on what you need to learn. So if you spent 5 years and just did grids freehand only, what would the outcome of that be? After 5 years, would someone pay you for the grids? No. If you got incredibly good at doing grids, is it about the grid? No. Would the grid by itself be a finished product? Meaning, if you posted it online, would anyone die of a heart attack of just marveling at how amazing this grid is? No. Will anyone hire you for the grid? No. Does the grid have intrinsic human value that you're trying to communicate? Like, is the grid art? Well, it could be, but that's not the intention when you're doing it like that. So no to all of those. So what the problem becomes then is that this person says, this tool that I'm trying to use in this particular way that I think it should be used in is not letting me practice the more important thing that is built over the top of it, which is perspective. Now let's get back here. What is perspective for? What do you, if your grid was perfect, so you've spent 5 years perfecting the grid, where are you now? What is perspective for? So you spent 5 years learning to be the best freehand grid maker. Now you're getting to perspective. Well, have you accomplished anything useful in those 5 years in terms of where you want to be? So perspective, it's for form building. You get to explore form, you get to make 3D shapes, you get to design things, you get to rotate them, look at them in different angles, right? You get to position your camera, you get to compose pictures, you get to do all of that. You get to do realistic illustration things. If you're working flat 2D, that's cool, like cartoony, that's fine. You don't need to know perspective then, so you don't necessarily, that would be another functional fixedness if you think you need something that you don't need. So if you do just want to make cartoony or stylized illustrations, you don't necessarily need to know perspective, so you might be going overboard. You might be thinking of, oh, I'm going to develop all these tools, but then what I'm going to do is just this much. So I'm going to learn this much, but I'm only going to practice this much. So I'm hoping I'm not making this too confusing. But what I wanted to just talk to you guys about today is when you're doing your studies, what are you actually learning? If you are spending more time on the grid than you are on the form building, on the design exploration, on finding shapes, on narrative support of elements that you're designing, on realistic illustrate, are you learning perspective when you're studying perspective, or are you spending so much time practicing the tools that you're actually neglecting to get the meaning of what you want to actually learn? So what are you actually learning when you're doing your studies? Now, this doesn't really apply to perspective only. When you're doing color studies, what is it you're learning? Are you just learning to pick values and colors correctly? Are you emulating texture? Are you learning about brushstrokes? Are you learning to simplify? Are you learning how composition works? Are you learning what values you need to put on the canvas to make something read? What are you actually learning? And are you doing this in a way that is useful and supporting your learning? Or are you getting fixed in, I need to paint everything, every single thing I need to paint with a 100% opaque square brush. So your brush just looks like this. No matter what you're doing, this is the only brush that you can paint with. Real painters paint only with 100% opacity, and they pick the perfect matching exact color for what they need next. If I don't do that, I suck, and I need to spend as much time as I can. My life depends on it, to be able to paint at 100% opacity, one click, one kill, correct color every single time. And 10 years later, you're still over here. Why? Functional fixedness. What are you learning? What are you trying to get out of your studies? Are you learning tools? Are you just getting stuck on the tool? Or are you actually getting the benefit of what you're doing? And just one final thing before I wrap this up. Think about tools. So again, I talked about the grid is a tool. Perspective could also be a tool in general picture making. You might be, this is so tricky, guys, but what one day is something that you're going for, on the next day is something that might become the new functional fixedness impediment. So let's say I'm talking to you guys today about the grid in perspective, and you're learning perspective, and you make all the right choices and use your tools correctly, and you learn perspective. And then you're doing a picture. So now bigger frame now is not just perspective over here that you're trying to learn. It's now bigger picture. It's the whole thing now. And perspective is this much of the whole picture. Are you now being stuck in, I need to have perfect 3-point perspective, one line correctly each and every time, right angles everywhere, everything going where I need it to go for it to be correct? Or are you actually doing this so it supports your composition, your message, whatever it is that you're doing? So what was yesterday something that you didn't have functional fixedness for, tomorrow becomes something that you're overemphasizing, and it's hurting your work again now. Final thing, use tools as tools. Use tools as tools. So the grid, right? Once you figure out how to make the grid, will you have to freehand it always? Would you? What would the purpose be of always freehanding it? So let's say you could constantly be improving your mechanical skill. Maybe. But would you be learning as you're doing it? Could you spend your time, instead of actually focusing on each and every line and making it, instead of doing that, could you be spending your mental energy on, instead of doing that, instead of thinking about lines still each and every time you're doing lines, instead of thinking of lines, how about thinking of the story? How about thinking of the color? How about thinking of whatever other thing you need to be improving? So once you know how to do the grid, you don't need to be doing the grid ever again. Just save it, reuse it. The grid is a mechanical tool. It's made by mechanical means. 3D programs draw grids effortlessly, and they're correct. And you can also set them up in a way that you can't possibly set them up by yourself, like knowing the focal length of the lens, the convergence, all that stuff. Just use the mechanics. Once you've learned how to do it so you can manipulate it, you don't need to do it yourself. You can just save it. Make a grid, make a perfect grid. Make yourself 10 grids of 2 vanishing points with a lot of convergence with a wide angle lens, or less convergence with a very long telephoto lens. Make yourself different grids. 3 point, 2 point, 1 point, whatever. Make yourself the grids, save them out. Once you know how to do them, once you've mastered doing them, do 100 grids if you have to. Once you've done the 100, there's no benefit between the 100 and the millionth grid. Chances are you've already perfected the use of the grid. No one's going to applaud you for the grid. People don't know what goes in the picture for it to look like that. They will see the final product. They will not see the underlying structure. If someone built a building and they had awesome scaffolding, but the building sucks, would that matter? So again, functional fixedness. If you're the scaffolding builder, don't get stuck on the scaffolding. That's not what it's about. If your scaffolding needs to go into the window and just like smash into the perfectly painted wall for you to get the perfect scaffolding, that is not a good way to do stuff. So that's it for this week. I'm hoping this thing will help you and make your studies better. I'm hoping that this might clear up a few things for you. Just don't get stuck. We all get stuck. All the time. Every single day you need to be evaluating, is this what I need to be doing? Is this the right thing? Am I getting stuck? Am I doing this out of stubbornness, hard-headedness, or just effortless thinking? Like, I know I should do this a lot, so I'm doing it a lot. But is it still useful? It's up to you. If you're doing this on your own, it's all up to you. If you want this to work good, you need to take full responsibility. And if you're not learning, if you're slowing down, reevaluate, redo it. You are your best teacher. No one can teach you as well as you can. Now I want to thank you guys also for the last video. All the likes, the 100 likes challenge thing, that really helped out, okay? The blog exploded. So many people commented. Views are up on the video. It's one of the highest viewed videos easily that I've ever done. And it's a lot of it is because people just don't know about the channel. So when you like, when you share this, when you comment, you're not just helping me, you're helping others find it, because people are finding it helpful, and I'm very happy for that. So thank you very much for helping. I want to keep helping you, so please help me back in return. Like and share this if you think it's useful. I don't want you to just be sharing it just to be sharing it. That doesn't do anybody any good to just be constantly putting it in people's head. Just click this. But if you can, if someone needs it, please let them have it. It'll be helping everybody out. Thank you very much. I'll see you soon.